people argued about what meant what, but where people were able to say like, yeah, I'm part of Occupy, and that's also in some ways what makes it not just like a organization in the same way that we think about organizations, but an idea. Like, what does it mean to like affiliate with that brand is modifiable.
So I want to say this, that there's a whole science behind this that came out of psychology about branding that the corporate world used. And a lot of people are like, it's the corporate world, I hate it, why should we use it? Is because it happens regardless of whether or not you want it to happen. It's the same thing with the meta-narrative. The media is going to brand you, or you get to construct your brand. The media is going to create a meta-narrative for your movement, or you construct there's no choice in the matter, right? And the second thing is that it's a double-edged sword, okay? So brands are really important because it makes, like, there is probably dozens of little picket lines, protests, union actions, and actions around homelessness and stuff in Los Angeles around economic inequality. Mm-hmm. Every single week that get no press whatsoever, mm-hmm. Okay? And if the public tries to understand that, it's too much phenomenon for them to get. They have to fit it into a framework. They can't, I like study, okay, this is this organization and that organization and this organization. And people who do psychological study, they believe that this is because our brains are really only able to maintain a relationship with a certain amount of people. Like the ideal sort of village size. Our brains are really can manage that many. So in the same way, like every time there's that diverse phenomenon, there's a relationship that we have with the movement. And whenever there's that diverse phenomenon, we associate it with the relationship. Just like every time we go to McDonald's, we associate that interaction. Oh, I had such great memories with Ronald McDonald, And so every time you go to McDonald's, even though they're totally different McDonald's in totally different places, you associate that with the same relationship that you had to the brand. And the only thing that unites all those diverse phenomenon is the brand, right? So, but it's a double-edged sword, because if in McDonald's there is a human pinky in in a burger, right? In one McDonald's in the southern France, from a disgruntled employee.
Just one McDonald's.
Just one. Right? The brand is damaged for everyone. They lose tens of millions of dollars, right? This actually happened at a Wendy's. They found a chili finger, and like Wendy's, the whole corporation that took like 100 years to build, I don't know, like 50 years to build, one of the largest, fast food chain in the world, almost collapsed under the brand damage of one Wendy's in the South. Okay?
One pinky.
Come on! What's the difference between a pinky and a chicken? So
They're coming up with their pinky strategy right now.
What I'm saying, violence to your brand is like having a human finger in your chili.
Yeah, we are having chili.
I would love to give a space. This meta branding stuff is pretty cool, and I think the role of symbols, sometimes even not even words, right, but symbology. Like for example, for us in the Dream Movement, it's the cap and the gown, right? We don't even have to say graduation or dreams. It's like cap and gown, walking, marching somewhere. That's the dreamers. So the symbols are so important, and I think this is where a lot of the role of art and the activism come together. So I want to give some space to Paul, because we were talking a little bit about it. I would love to hear your thoughts, your reflections, because art is great as for movements.
Yeah, I mean, I've been having a lot of conversations with people, over the weekend, and it's something that I try to do in my work all the time is everybody understands the importance of art in a movement, but a lot of people see art as something that happens at the end of a strategy. Like you're producing, you come up with a strategy or campaign, and then you get somebody to make some art about it, or people tack that on at the end. But what Carlos and I were talking about earlier, what I've been talking about with people, is the importance of bringing artists in very early in the process, because I'm just starting to develop a language around this, like with meta branding and how that fits. It's something that I've push towards intuitively because I see it working. But when you're able to bring in artists and musicians and people that work in theater, early on, it really helps influence the work that you do from that point forward. When you're able to connect to people on an emotional level, when you're working with people that their entire focus of their career and their craft is communicating with people through these intangible emotions, you're able to come up with strategies that are better. You're able to come up with artwork that is better through the collaboration of artists and activists, and I see it fitting really, really well with when you're talking about meta branding and all of this, because it's something that you're able to connect across barriers with people, but it also allows you the flexibility to interpret it in your own way. You know, so as you're talking about meta branding, it gives you something that's connecting large groups of people, but it allows space for each person to see it kind of through their own lens.
I mean, I think what you're talking about a little is having a front-loaded strategy around branding, but also other forms of art in your movement. I think that's really interesting.
Actually, would you mind talking about the banner campaign? Just what that ended up doing? Which one that,
Mayday?
The Mayday campaign, or the that's the one I'm showing you?
no, the Mayday one, I think.
The one I was talking about, in the group earlier, or yesterday?
The one that got news coverage.
Oh yeah, I mentioned it. You know, it was a campaign that we had done with Fossil Yellow Frontera, and it was something that happens every year, and it happens around the country. It's just a very simple march, you know, starting in one place and marching to the courthouse. But the documentation of it, every photograph had just incredible art everywhere. And it's something that when you're looking at a photograph of a very simple march, and instead of seeing just signs, you're seeing art that you're able to like dig in deeper and deeper and deeper all over the place, and everything becomes visually striking, and you're able to catch people that aren't looking to understand your movement, but you grasp, you know, like you're able to catch them through art. Like you see a really good illustration in a magazine, and then you're more likely to read the article. You know, it's that same concept of allowing things to live longer because they're documented and because they allow space for you to dig deeper and deeper into what the movement is trying to do without using words and without using language.
I was just thinking about like seeing like the Fifth and thinking about Occupy and like other like big images. It seems like it can be pretty high risk to have something that's so visible and so associated. Like as great as it can be in like uniting a lot of different types of work, it's also anyone can pick it up. Anyone who's seen it, even if they haven't been to a training, they haven't sort of picked up the DNA, they can just kind of use it for whatever they want. So I'd be curious to hear either now or just like in other conversations about best practices for like how that can not happen or how like to control.
Exactly the next point. You're ahead of me. You're right ahead of me. Is that with meta branding, you have to, if you're going to front load meta branding, okay, you have to front load rules about open association, and they have to be collectively enforced. Okay, so what that means is that we don't have like, we can't sue people for using our brand, right? But the movement has to know that, okay, if you use our brand, you have to agree to our DNA, and it's an exchange. You get to use our brand, but then you have to use our DNA. And if everyone knows that from the beginning, and there's multiple brands out there, you can pick to affiliate with Yellow Pora or Red Pora. You get to choose. But if you pick Yellow Pora, you gotta have the DNA. And we had a whole nother training about what's called the 4 lines of defense. All these DNA, each piece of the DNA needs to have a robust system of collectively agreeing to and enforcing the DNA. And the meta brand is one of those elements, and it's essential that you do it, or else people use it and they manipulate it.
This isn't a direct response. One thing I thought about with the meta brand is like if this whole thing is theater, this is the name of the protagonist. Right, so choose wisely.
So team structures, okay? So in the, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Sam's gonna tell you the story.
We just talk a lot about, so there's the, who recognizes which piece of it. So like the fist becomes very recognizable generally, but, so for example, in Upcore and also in many other movements, there are things that become not totally insider, but like, you know, for the students, you can see a red square, and if you are in, you know what that means. If you're outside of it, you may not recognize it, but if you're in, you understand that you have some kind of connection there, and there's a level of trust that gets built, or an opening for conversation. And then with Upcore, you know, the kind of badges and the level up colors, like the orange fist inside the green thing means one thing, and the red fist inside the black background means another thing in terms of what your skills are, where you're from. It's like, not gang colors necessarily, but like where I'm from, what my skills are, what my function is. And so if you're in a protest and you see a blue badge, that's a media person, okay, I can grab that person, they can support me. So some of it's totally outward facing, and some of it's like in terms of that cohort building work as well.
And, yeah, and if it's a popular movement, then, you know, once you start seeing these things everywhere, you could like sort of sense your strength.
Absolutely. So when, look, you know, and Max can tell you so many stories about this, but if you have a brand and you're like, look, it's great if everyone affiliates the same brand and then we'd all have more power, they're gonna resent the hell out of you if you're trying to pressure or coerce them into a brand that's not their own. But if you have a lot of momentum and you are recognized and the brand is really popular, everyone wants to affiliate with the brand, right? If Rage Against the Machine is super popular and everyone loves Rage Against the Machine, everyone's going to start wearing their t-shirt, right? So, and you need rules though. It's different because if you're a fan of Rage Against the Machine, there needs to be certain rules about what it means to be fans of Rage Against the Machine and wear the t-shirt, right? But this is different than a lot of other branding where we're trying to do this in a way where people vote with their feet. They associate with the brand and they put it on because they want to, because of the momentum. Team structures. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Team structures. So this Swarmrise is really good about talking about this, the book. Creating a culture in which the whole organization can exist within the DNA, within the entire DNA. So what I mean by this is that where does the DNA reside? How do you have all this DNA and you're going to create an autonomous unit that makes a decision. You have to embed the DNA, not in an individual just as much, but in the group. So everything that makes the movement work is embedded within each group, so that each group can go and form another group with all the DNA, and that they won't miss any element. They'll have everything in the DNA is known and understood in the group. And we talk about principles, which is that there's a mass training that trains them, initiates them into the DNA, and there's principles that helps them understand what the DNA is. But all of that is embedded primarily in a group. In 12-step, it's the 12 traditions. Each group in 12-step has the 12 traditions. And a lot of times in 12-step, groups create new groups and another group, and there's a bioreplication of groups, and each of them have the 12 traditions. Each group has the 12 traditions and defends it. That's the same with team structure. The team is not just, does it have the DNA, but it's an embodied expression of the entire DNA. They are totally autonomous to make decisions and run campaigns and tactics within the boundaries of the DNA. And this eliminates the bottlenecks of decision making. Okay, how frustrating is it if you have to pass every decision through a General Assembly with 200 people every single day? Okay? So there's a bottleneck of decision making. That's not autonomy. That's not autonomy. Autonomy means that I can plan an action. I have all the tools that I can do it with my team. That's autonomy, right? So the DNA allows we didn't necessarily want that in Occupy because everybody could do everything without any sort of consensus process. It would have been even more crazy.
Oh, yeah, that was what happened.
Okay. But anyways, so sometimes the consensus process can be good, but if you have the DNA, it gives you the boundaries to make it so that people have more autonomy, not less. It allows them to have more freedom to do whatever they want, but it needs to be within the boundaries of the giant beach that you give them. They can make 1,000 sandcastles, they can do whatever they want as long as it's within the DNA of the movement. And it's the teams that get to make the decisions, not individuals, okay? So in the 3-pilot rule in the Swarmwise says that you have to have 3 people that agree to do an action, not an individual. So this also supports the leadership and creates a relational accountability and group norms and culture. You can't create culture with one individual, you can within a group. In the global justice movement, got a lot of this from theories of social ecology and Murray Bookchin and this whole anarchist tradition that created affinity groups that believed in mutual aid and knew that teams needed to be the central element of how the movement organized itself. And decision making is based on teams making autonomous decisions from the bottom up with voting with their feet. So how do campaigns and tactics happen? Everyone has autonomy to do whatever campaigns and tactics they want as long as it's within DNA. So how the decisions are made? They're made because teams make decisions. And once you get a critical mass of people to make, and this is kind of what happens within United We Dream, right? Like, there's a lot of ideas for campaigns, but it's only after they get a critical mass of teams independently deciding what campaign to go with that it explodes. Now, sometimes there's individuals that like really organize that, and sometimes it's more directed from the top than the bottom, but each team still has total autonomy to decide, right? Whether or not they're in or out.
I think the issue though is that we do that.
Yeah.
That's definitely true, but at the same time, like when it comes to like dissent, like basically the non-popular opinion,
Yes.
they don't get resourced. That's some a lot of the contention is that, you know, when you think about a membership-led organization and you're accountable to your membership, you're accountable to all your membership. But if you only apply the rule of majority rules, then the other folks
So what
might
I'm
not
hearing
agree.
is, that's different than United We Dream, than this DNA, is this DNA actually has it so that you have more autonomy, because you can do whatever you want within the DNA, but you don't necessarily get the support of other groups, right? And what you're saying is there's still a majority vote for them to get the resources, right?
Well, they need to be part of, I mean, it's the same thing, we vote with our, our affiliates vote with our feet, but it's just actually when it comes to how national resources are invested into, it's basically, we only end up investing in the majority vote, you know?
Yeah,
Or
no,
people
that
who-
makes sense. I know there's problems with that, but
There's some issues, just a little tiny bit.
just a few major issues with that. But, so action format, you wanna take this one?
I can take this.
I have a question
Okay.
about team structure.
Yeah, sure.
So what is the system in place for accountability? So if someone breaks the DNA,
That's right.
how do we get them to stop?
So, I can respond to this?
Yeah, totally.
So this depends. I mean, we have a training called the 4 Lines of Defense, which is about how do you defend the DNA from cancer or the vaccination for it. And there is parts of like what you do before, right, to front load the culture, and then it's when it actually happens. So we might do that one tomorrow if it makes sense. I don't know, but we also I think we have a webinar, right?
Yeah,
We do have a webinar
We did have
around
a
it.
webinar around
It's
it.
in common problems.
It's in common problems. So yes, it's a whole strategy to figure out how to. My hope is it's much easier if you front load it on culture, than try to address it later.
Okay, because already, people in your movement are already defending the DNA. You might not realize it, but they are. Whatever elements that are embedded in your culture are already enforced, okay? But the problem is that people haven't front-loaded enough to put within the culture the elements that need to be defended, right? So, for instance, when I talked to Vaughn, I'm like, how did you do nonviolent discipline? And he says, we did a week-long mass training with hardcore theory of change training for everybody. And we had nonviolent discipline training too, and people knew that if they did nonviolent discipline, that people would go to jail, and some people would probably die if they broke nonviolent discipline. Everyone, you know, a huge portion of the movement, when they had new people join and started throwing rocks and stuff, the people that that enforced the discipline was not the leaders. It was everybody in the crowd said, no, put down the rocks, because they did mass training to make it part of the entire culture. Instead of just having monitoring